Okay, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Huey. I hope your cold or cough gets better and goes away. Thank you for all those announcements. I sent in the Monitor this month my article concerned education and training and classes for the coming fall season. And there's a 3-question survey in the article that you send to my personal email address with answers to 3 questions that will help us form the classes and how to present the classes in the coming season. So please take time to answer the 3 questions. My email address is in there, it's in the article, and I'm already categorizing or summarizing the results coming in. There's also going to be a social for members this coming September 27th at the Turtle Rock Community Center, where we've had the previous 2 socials. This one, September 27th, is from 12:30 to 2:30, and there will be some light lunch provided, and the cost is $5 per person. All members are invited, and all members are asked if you wish to bring a guest. You can bring a guest, but it's $5 per person. Some members like to bring a gift to share of some kind of food, like cookies or brownies or something. If you wish to do that, you're more than welcome to do that. And we appreciate those that have done it in the past. Thank you very much. Okay, at the end of this meeting, as Huey said, there will be a drawing for a free membership. You must be in attendance at the end of the meeting when we do the drawing. So don't log off right away. And we will draw for that winner who will get a free 1-year membership added on to their current membership. Okay, now it's my pleasure to introduce, well, there's the Huey put on the, also in the Monitor, that's our social coming up in September with all the information you need. Thank you, Huey. Now I'd like to go to introduce our speaker. And we're all using photos. We can't help it. It's part of our phones, right? It's so easy. You don't have to remember to bring a camera because you have your phone, you have a camera, a very good camera that you're always taking with you everywhere. And these digital photos, they should last forever. After all, they're digital, right? They're not on paper. There's no negatives. But the digital photos don't fade with time, and they can protect against natural disasters like fire and floods. Your photos will exist. Well, hopefully they do. That's the theory. And yet, if you're one of the millions of people with a digital camera, which means your phone, of course, the chances of your great-great-grandchildren ever seeing your digital photos is pretty slim. So we're going to find out tonight why the odds are stacked against you and what you can do to increase those odds to keep those photos alive and well for the future and even 200 years from now. So our presenter today is Mr. Mark Schulman. He has spent his career as a computer instructor, software designer, and small business owner. He's taught a wide range of classes for major corporations and worked on large software development projects. He currently works as the IT manager for a group of family practices of physicians, as well as a small company that runs some clinical drug trials. His major interest these days is the computer technology that made the moon landings possible way back in the 1960s, which was the Stone Age, of course, we all know. He lives near Orlando, Florida. So Mark, I'm going to turn it over to you. Thank you so much for coming. And we're looking forward to how to keep those digital photos alive.
Well, thanks very much. I'm very glad to be here. All right. So tonight's topic is preserving digital photos. And my name is Mark Schulman. And again, I've been doing some sort of information technology for about 45 years now. As we go through this presentation, I'm going to talk about several different products, and I'll give you brand names and where to get some of this stuff. I just want to make clear that I have no affiliation with any of these products. This is just stuff I use. And if you've got something you like better, or if Huey wants to make some recommendations, he knows more about some of these products than I do. So no, I don't, I'm not selling anything here. I guess that's the important thing. So the first topic I want to talk about is the promise of digital photography. And this is what we all expect from digital photos, but it doesn't always happen this way. So the way things used to be, and a lot of you can remember this, is we used to have photo albums, and we'd take photos and we'd paste the photos in photo albums, and we'd hope that these paper copies would survive. And then around the year 2000, we started to see the rise of digital photos. And here are a few important dates. In 2002, for the first time, digital cameras outsold film cameras. And I remember having a digital camera about this time. The photos were not very good, but I could take a lot of them, and that was really cool. Around 2004, Kodak announced that it would no longer sell film cameras in the developed world. They were focusing just on digital cameras. And in 2006, Nikon stopped production of all but 2 models of film cameras. Now, there's been a little bit of a resurgence of film cameras, but digital cameras are far, far and wide the camera that most of the manufacturers are making their money on. And a lot of manufacturers today, like Panasonic and others, only make digital cameras. By 2010, the worldwide number of cameras exceeded 1 billion. Now, that was 13 years ago. And by the current year, 2023, there are 4.4 billion camera phones worldwide. So, and we've gotten used to the idea that just about anything that happens, somebody there has got a camera phone and manages to pull it out and shoot videos or photos. So there's a lot of advantages to digital photos. Obviously, they cost almost nothing to take. Once you've got the camera, you've got the SD cards or whatever you're storing them on, taking a photo costs almost nothing. It's easy to take thousands of photos, and we all do that. And you can make unlimited copies of the photos. I remember going to Costco or even drugstores and having the photos developed, and it was so expensive I couldn't afford to make a lot of copies of it. Now that's not true. And of course, we can edit the photos. So if we want to crop them, if we want to change the colors on them, we can do all of that. Our phones, as well as all digital cameras now, have huge capacities of photos. So I can go on a vacation and I can take a single SD card with me. I usually have another one just for a backup. But if I want to, I could take a single SD card and I can't fill it up on the average vacation. And I can take thousands of photos and not fill up the card. So we just have the capacity of taking thousands and thousands of photos. And theoretically, those photos can last forever. They'll never fade, smear, or tear, or at least that's the idea. But there are some downsides to digital photos too, and let's talk about that. The photos themselves, they're intangible, of course. They're just bits and bytes on a computer or on an SD card. And it's really hard to hold a digital a digital photo in your hand and say, here's the photo. And millions of photos are taken every day, but also every day, countless photos are lost. An SD card goes bad. A camera gets dropped in a fountain at a tourist destination. A camera gets stolen. Lots of things happen. Phones get smashed up. Lots of things can happen that cause people to lose photos. And in fact, I know a lot of people who have lost the vast majority of their photos. Most people don't know how to preserve them, and that's what we're going to talk about in here. Now, I want to give you a quick story, and I think this is a fascinating story. So my mom had gone up to Nashville in 2003, and just on a whim, she grew up in Nashville, and she stopped by her childhood home and just knocked on the door and introduced herself to the people that live there now. And they invited her in, and she talked about her experience growing up in that in that home, and they exchanged contact information. And a few years later, they were doing some renovation and they knocked out a wall. And behind the wall, it turned out that some drywall had been put up, and a bunch of photos of my mom's childhood had actually been plastered up behind this wall. And they found all these photos from my mom's childhood and shipped them to her. And this is a package. This is a photo of the actual box when it arrived that had all these photos in it that she never knew existed. So the idea was, so the question is, if these had been digital photos, this almost never could have happened. Imagine somebody finding an SD card. What would they likely do? Probably just throw it away. Maybe they'd look at it, but it wouldn't be the same as finding a big file box full of photos. And I saw a quote, and I wish I could remember where I saw this. And if somebody sees this video and says, oh, that's my quote, I really apologize. But I saw this in a magazine, and I really thought this was an interesting quote. It's from about 10 years ago. And the guy said, our family history ended the day we got a digital camera. And the reason for that is, even though digital photos never fade, never smear, never can get torn, nonetheless, what happens to most of them is they just disappear. A computer dies, a hard drive dies, and that's the end of thousands and thousands of digital photos. So that, whereas printed photos, you can have a fire that burns up a bunch of photos. You can have floods that can destroy a bunch of photos. But generally, when people come across real printed photos from 50 years ago, they know what they found and they take care of them. So I want to talk about why this is true and what we can do about it. So we want to make sure, my goal is to make sure that my kids' grandchildren have access to all the photos that I'm taking today of the family. So what do I want to make sure happens? I want to make sure that, number one, my photos survive into the future. I want to make sure that the photos are identifiable, and I want to make sure that they get found. So how can I make sure that those things happen? So we're going to talk about each one of these tonight. So first, let's talk about how to make sure that your photos survive. And the answer to that is copies, copies, copies. This is the important thing. Your photos should never exist in only one place. And the reason for that is all hard drives fail eventually. All equipment fails eventually. Your phone, if you keep it long enough, something's going to go wrong with it and it's going to fail. And besides which, it's really easy to erase things accidentally. I've done that. I've erased movies and photos that I meant to keep, and I thought I'd copied them somewhere, and there they went. Sometimes you can get them back, sometimes not. But let's talk about the drive failures. Every year, there's a company called Backblaze that does backups. And I got one of their reports from several years ago. And at the time, they had a data center that had over 41,000 hard drives in them. And what they discovered is that amongst some brands, as many as 26% of the hard drives from that manufacturer died every year. So what that tells me is, if you had one of the hard drives that belonged to one of those manufacturers, after an average of 4 years, that hard drive would die and you would lose everything on it. If you want to read that report, it's really interesting because they call out some manufacturers. I've got a link down there to the report, and you don't need to copy that down. I'm going to make sure that Bill gets a copy of the slides, and he can post them on the website or pass them around or email them around or whatever. So you'll have a copy of this. And the other thing I want to talk about is photos and phones, smartphones. Most of us take most of our photos on smartphones. And for a lot of people, their phones have the only copy of the photos that they own. So a story, I had someone at work who was not particularly technical. And she came to me and she said that about 6 months ago, she had been to her daughter's wedding and she'd taken a whole bunch of photos and now her phone had quit working. And she'd taken it to the Apple store and they couldn't get it working. They just had to sell her a new phone. And she was begging me to get the photos off the phone somehow. And I couldn't help her. And the unfortunate thing was the only place that those photos existed was on her phone. Millions of phones are lost, stolen, or broken each year. And I actually have a story about that. I had taken my cat to the vet about 6 months ago, and I was leaving the vet and I had the cat in my arms and I had a cat carrier, which I hadn't bothered to use with the cat. And I had the cat's leash and collar and I had all the paperwork I'd gotten and I was juggling all that and my keys and trying to get all that in the car. And just to get it out of my hands for a minute, I put the phone on top of the car. And I know you can see this coming with all the distractions with the cat and everything. I forgot I had put the phone up there and I just drove off. And when I got home, I realized I didn't have my phone. And because my wife and I track each other, she was able to tell me where the phone was. And it was laying right in the middle of a busy street in Winter Park. And I went back and I found the phone. And there it is right there. And the phone was completely dead. I did not get anything off of it. And if that had been the only place that I had had my photos, I would have lost them. So we need to make copies of all of our photos, but what do we copy them onto? So we need something that's going to last a long time. We want something that people in the future will be able to read or that will be able to read in the future. So you can imagine, for example, if I'd copied all my photos 10 years ago onto floppy disk, I might have a little bit of trouble because I don't own a floppy disk drive anymore. So it needs to be something that's readable. It needs to be able to hold a reasonable number of photos. And so what can I copy photos onto where I have a reasonable chance that I can put all my photos on it, and in the future, I'll be able to read those, get those photos back off. And this is a serious problem because media changes all the time, and it's really hard to predict 100 years from now what's going to physically survive and what will people actually be able to use. Does anybody know what this thing right here is? It used to be very popular. So it's a wax cylinder that they used to record music on. And I would venture to guess that nobody on this call has got a player that can play that. So there's an example of a very popular medium that just went away. And there are lots of those. Think about these: floppy disks, VHS tapes, slides. That's a smart media card in the lower left. I used to have several cameras that use those. And 8mm film. Hardly anybody's got projectors anymore. Someone here may have a projector that can play those, but not many people do. An LP record. Now, LP records have actually been a little bit stubborn. There's still a lot of people that really enjoy them. But the rest of these are all on their way out. And a lot of people who, we all had floppy disk drives 10 years ago, or maybe even 5 years ago. We all had VHS players. A lot of us had slide projectors, and most of us don't anymore. So these are just things that we all used to have, and we can't read them anymore. So what do you store photos on that you have a reasonable chance that 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now, you'll be able to actually read? So, and that will survive. So some poor choices. Memory cards like SD cards are not good choices because they and flash drives have a limited life. People don't realize, or a lot of people don't realize this. If you put files on a flash drive and put the flash drive up on the shelf and leave it alone for 10 years, your files almost certainly will not be there when you go look at it, or at least they won't be undamaged. The memory, flash memory, does not like to be just left alone. It needs to be powered up and it needs to be accessed. And even then, it's got a limited lifetime. So flash memory cards and flash drives are a terrible choice. And then obviously diskettes are a terrible choice because hardly anybody's got diskette drives anymore. And even if you decided that you could use diskette drives, they don't hold very many. These days, a diskette drive can't even hold a single photo that I take on my camera. So what's the right track to go for here? Well, I'm going to give you a couple of options, but believe it or not, I think, even though many of you may not use these anymore, I think the best storage medium, if you really want to make sure it's going to be around 50 years from now, is CDs and DVDs. And I'll talk more about those in just a second. And I know what you're all thinking. You're thinking, well, wait, I just got this brand new laptop and it doesn't even have a DVD drive in it. I don't have a computer that's got a DVD drive anymore. How can I even use it? Well, the answer is you can buy them on Amazon really cheap. So here's a USB external CD, DVD drive that you can burn DVDs on. You just plug this into a USB port on your computer or laptop, and now you've got a DVD drive. And you can make all the DVDs you want. And I'll tell you why I think this is a good choice in just a second. So you want to use good quality CDs and DVDs, and you want to use the ones you're looking for are CDRs, DVD-Rs, DVD plus Rs. You can find these all over Amazon. The ones you want to avoid are the ones that are on the right-hand side there, the CD-RWs, DVD-RWs. They're not meant to last a long time. They're meant to be reusable. And so that's not what you want if you're going to archive something. So what can go wrong with a DVD? If you record stuff onto a DVD, if you copy all your photos onto a DVD, what could potentially go wrong? Well, DVDs use an aluminum layer that can corrode, and it will over time. So if you just take a standard DVD, record stuff on it, eventually oxygen is going to get to the aluminum and cause it to corrode. The dyes that are used to record the material can degrade. And of course, they're susceptible to physical damage. DVDs are not that strong. You can accidentally break them if you drop them or drop something on them, they can break. But the first two are easily solved. And the way you solve it is with what's known as archival CDs and DVDs. These are special DVDs that are specifically meant to have stuff recorded on them and to be put away and to last a very, very long time. And the way they handle these problems is that they use gold instead of aluminum, and gold can't be destroyed by oxygen. So that, as you'd expect, because they're using gold, they're gold colored and they're a lot more expensive than one that uses aluminum. And they also use special long-lasting dyes to record the information. And the belief is that if you record something on these DVDs, they should last 100 years. So that appears to be our answer. And I believe that over the coming 50 to 100 years, you'll still be able, there's so much stuff on DVDs, you'll still be able to buy the drives inexpensively. If anything, they may get cheaper. And it's a great way to record stuff. So here's the brand that I've used, and it's verbatim Ultralife Gold archival DVDs. A 5-pack on Amazon costs $12. Now, that's pretty expensive for DVDs. A regular pack of DVDs, of 50 DVDs on Amazon is about the same price, but they just won't last as long as these guys will. So that gives you, I'm trying to do this in my head, 25 gigabytes of space to store photos on. So a few of those, and that will do the trick. And I've actually used these not only to back up photos, but I work in a medical office, and we have to make sure patient records and study data is kept for a long, long time. And it turns out, I found this really interesting when I got this job. The rule in Florida is that you have to keep it for 25 years after the person turns 18. So imagine a family is in town and they've got their infant son with them, or their toddler who's 1 year old, and the toddler gets sick and they have to take him to the doctor. So the toddler's 1 year old, you're going to have to keep it for 42 years. Did I do that right? 17 plus 25, I think 42 years. So what we do when we have patients that we're not actually seeing anymore, we put their medical records on our archival DVDs, and we always make 2 copies of it. So we've got 2 DVDs that have their medical records on it. And this is really important for us. We can get sued if somebody comes to us and tries to get those medical records and we don't have them. So how can you make sure that your CDs and DVDs survive? You want to store them in a cool, dark place. Use plastic cases. Label the cases. You can use a Sharpie to just write on the cases, or you can print nice labels, whatever you want to do. But here's the thing. Don't write on the discs themselves. A lot of pens, the ink in them is destructive of the DVD. So if you actually write on the DVD, you can cause it to degrade. So write on the case, not the DVD. And don't use stick-on labels on the DVD. Again, you can use it on the case, but the glue that they use on a lot of stick-on labels can actually degrade the DVD. So leave the DVD pristine. And this is one case where brand name matters. Pick a manufacturer that you've heard of, JVC, TDK, Memorex, Maxell, Verbatim, Sony, and others that you've heard of. They'll make a better quality DVD than some cheap Chinese manufacturer. And again, use the archival DVDs. Most manufacturers make them. And make lots and lots of copies. That's the nice thing is you can make 1 copy of stick all your photos on a DVD, and then you can make 10 copies of it if you want to, and send them to friends, take them to work, put them in your desk drawer at work. That's what I do. So if my house burns to the ground, I haven't lost all my photos. There's a copy in my desk drawer at work. If you don't know how to make CDs or DVDs, it's easy to learn. A piece of software that I really like that I use it's by a company called A Shampoo, and it's called Burning Studio, and there's a free and a paid version. The free version will do everything you need it to do, and that's what I use. The only downside is they throw up a nag screen every time you run the program saying, wouldn't you like to buy the paid version? No, I would not. If you don't want to go the route of DVDs, then the other option is external hard drives. And you want to use a spinning mechanical drive, not an SSD. The SSD will fail over the long term. Again, flash memory is not meant to have stuff recorded on it for the long term. Buy a mechanical spinning drive. Pick a reliable brand name. And choose a lower capacity. This is pretty important. So as manufacturers manage to cram on more and more data, so you can buy a 1 terabyte drive, a 4 terabyte drive, a 16 terabyte drive. In some of those higher capacity drives, they pull some tricks that are going to make your data less robust and more easy to cause you to lose it. So I would buy a 1 or 2 terabyte drive, and I think those are going to last longer than the 16 terabyte drives that they're manufacturing today. When you're concerned about reliability, you want to stay away from the bleeding edge. So when you hear that somebody has announced a new 32 terabyte hard drive, that's fine. But if you're counting on sticking stuff on it that you want desperately not to lose, I would not go with anything that's brand new like that. Store it in a cool, dry place. And this is important, spin it up occasionally. Spinning hard drives don't like to have stuff recorded on them and just be put away for a long term and never used. The bearings can freeze up and other mechanical problems can happen. They like to be used occasionally. So all you need to do is just plug it in to any laptop or computer and just let it spin for 10 minutes. And then you can unplug it and put it away again, and do that once a year and you'll be fine. So, but don't just put it away and forget about it and expect that 75 years later, it'll still be available. These drives are cheap. The ones I like that I use for my backups are Western Digital Elements. There's an example of one of my hard drives right there. I checked the prices on Amazon last night. A 1 terabyte drive is $55. A 2 terabyte drive is about $70. And that will probably hold everything you've got. think about a New Year's tradition. So what I like to do on New Year's Day, I usually don't have much going on. I'm watching a parade or maybe a football game. And while I'm doing that, I copy DVDs. I copy my backup DVDs and I send copies to friends and family. So just, hey, Fred, here's a DVD that's got all our family photos from the past 10 years. And that way you get copies into other people's hands. So not only do they get to enjoy all your family photos, but if your house burns to the ground, you can go back to Fred and say, hey, have you got that DVD I sent you? I need a copy of it. So it really helps to get this stuff into other people's hands. And then my hard drives, my backup hard drives, if I haven't used them in a while, I plug them in, I let them spin up, and then that way I'm sure that they're going to stay supple and fresh as the day they were born. You can use online services for backing up photos, and I'm a big fan of these. So there's a few of the really common ones that people use today. They're great for sharing photos, and it's great as yet another place to put your photos as a backup. But don't count on them as your only place for having the photos. If you read any of the terms of service for any of these services, they'll tell you, hey, if we lose your photos, we'll apologize to you, but that's it. And so this is a great place to put copies of your photos, but don't let it be the only place. Also put your photos on DVDs, also put your photos on hard drives or some combination. One thing we forget about when we have digital photos is that one way to back them up is to make prints of them. So the question becomes, if I print out my photos, how long are those printed photos going to last? Well, it depends, and nobody knows. So I read a quote in a magazine not very long ago, and the quote was this: in 20, 50, or 100 years, we'll know what really worked and what didn't. It's talking about printed photos. But until then, all we can do is guess. So here's the best guess I can find on the internet of how long printed photos can last. So color prints and negatives that are professionally processed should last about 40 years if you put them in a cool, dark place away from sunlight and take good care of them. They should last about 40 years. Inkjet photos under ideal circumstances should last better than 75 years. That was a real surprise to me when I found that number, that I can print a photo that will last longer than what a commercial processing facility does. So that was a big surprise to me. However, most photos that people print won't even last 5 years. So what's the difference? Why can photos last 75 years, but most photos only last about 5 years? Well, so what do we have to do? First of all, buy a good photo printer. If you're really interested in printing photos, then the $45 printer you got is probably not going to print great photos. A really good photo printer is probably going to cost a couple $100. This next one really pains me. I don't like it any better than you guys do, but it's the truth. Use the manufacturer's ink. Now, I use third-party ink. I get ink cartridges at LD Products or wherever, just like you all do. But if you really want photos that last, there's no getting around the fact that the manufacturer's ink is better than the third-party cheap ink. So if you really want a photo that lasts, use a good photo printer, use the manufacturer's ink, and use really good photo paper. And in particular, avoid the fast dry photo paper. So when you print a photo, it should take several minutes to dry. Store your photos out of direct sunlight. And if you want to display photos, they're better if kept under glass. Now, that used to be what everybody did. When my parents printed out their wedding photos, every picture frame you bought had glass on it, and then you wound up putting the photo under the glass in the picture frame. A lot of picture frames don't have glass anymore, but the glass stops UV light and really does keep the photos from fading and will take better care of them. So if you're going to display them, keep them under glass. Okay, so on to the next topic. want to make sure that the photos are identified. So what did we used to do when back 50 years ago or 75 years ago, when you'd take a photo, how would people know who that's a photo of? Well, you'd flip the photo over and you'd write the date on the back, and you'd say, this is Aunt Megan and Uncle Billy and their two kids, Tom and Frank. And so there you go. That's how people 100 years later would know what that was a photo of. Well, we can't do that of digital photos. So how do we ensure that people know what our photos are of? So we can't write on the back of the photos, but what you can do is you can organize your photos into meaningful directories. So this is actually a screenshot of some old photos off my computer, and you can see that every photo is in a folder, and the name of the folder has the date in it and what it's of. So it doesn't tell me what's each individual photo is of, but at least I know that, okay, the photos that I took on February 2nd were of Heather's wedding dress. So, okay, that helps a lot in identifying the people. What I try to do, and I'm not that great at it, I have to admit, but if you really want to make sure your photos are identifiable, then create a text file in each folder and put the file name of the photo and just put a brief description of what it is. So here I'm in Notepad, and I write that, okay, image 5301 is Aunt Millie on her birthday. Okay, well, so I can't write on the back of the photo, but if the photo is in a folder with this text file, then people will know what the photo is of. I suggest using a text file. Don't use a Word document or photo organizing software, because that file may not be compatible with software that's available 75 years from now or 50 years from now. We've all seen the versions of Word changes, and they're pretty good about backward compatibility, but you just never know. So a plain text file is what you should use. There's also something that's in the file itself called EXIF data, and that's exchangeable image file. You can actually pull up the properties of a photo, and if you go to the details tab, it's got a place where you can type in a title and who it's of, and it'll have information about the size, and you can add any information you want. You can add who took the photo, what the event was. You can pretty much add anything you want into this data. The only problem with doing that is most people don't know that that data is there. So if somebody finds the photo 75 years from now, are they going to think to pull up the properties on that photo and look at the data? Probably not. So unless you put something with the photos that says, please look at the properties for all these photos, and it'll tell you who they are, then people probably aren't going to think to look for it. But it's a great solution if you can get people to actually look for it. Okay, so the last topic we're going to talk about is making sure that your photos are found. So I talked about that story about the people that found the photos of my mom's childhood. And they found a dresser that actually, believe it or not, drywalled a dresser into the wall. And so they looked in the drawers of this dresser when they took the drywall off, and they found that it was just full of photos. And so it was immediately obvious what that was. But if they had found a flash drive or an SD card or a floppy disk, would it really have been obvious what it is? So we want to make sure that people can actually find our photos and know what they found. So photos don't stand out like a box of photos would. And a lot of photos are stored only on your computer's hard drive, and they're really easy to lose. And individual flash drives or SD cards are so small that it's really easy to miss them. So here's some suggestions I'd like to make. Put CDs, DVDs, hard drives of photos in with your important papers. So, for example, I've got a lot of people still today have safe deposit boxes or safes. That's a really good place to put copies of all of your photos along with your important papers, because that's where people are going to look. And if they find a DVD in your safe or in your safe deposit box, they're going to realize that this may have something important on it because they went to the trouble of putting it someplace secure. Tell people where they are, especially your kids. So if your kids know that you've got these DVDs with photos on them, then when you're not around to get the photos for them, they're going to know that these DVDs exist and they're likely to look for them. And be sure to label the hard drives and DVD cases. And remember, don't write on the DVDs themselves, label the cases. And the important thing is make sure people realize what they found. Make sure that if somebody finds your photos, they realize it's your photos. And here's a great way to do this. I really love this idea and I've done it. Create a photo book and put the DVD in the back of the book. So I'm sure most of you, probably a majority of you, have actually used these services where you can send them 20 or 30 photos and they'll send you back this beautiful printed book that's got all your photos in it. This is not expensive. And so what I suggest is pick out 20 really good family photos, send them in, have a book made, and then put the DVD of all of your photos in the back of the book. And Amazon will sell these little adhesive sleeves that you can stick on the book cover, and then you can put the DVD inside that sleeve, and that works really good. Here's a couple examples of some places you can go that'll print these books for you. And I found a Groupon for getting one of these books made, and it cost me $10 plus shipping. So it's really not expensive if you watch for discounts, coupons, or Groupons. You can have them made really inexpensively. If you don't like that expense, another thing you can do is just buy a photo album. You can still get those at Walmart. Buy a photo album, print out a selection of family photos and put them in the photo album. And then again, stick a DVD in the back of the photo album. If you're backing up to hard drives, then you can just wrap a rubber band around the photo album and put the DVD in, or I'm sorry, the hard drive in with them. So somehow put the printed book with whatever you're backing using to back up your photos so that when somebody finds it, they've got something tangible to look at that, oh, this is something that has to do with family photos. And finally, the last thing, and this is a little bit of work, but I really recommend it, is find somebody in your family that you can appoint as the family archivist. The family archivist is somebody that occasionally, maybe once a year, contacts other members in the family, whether it's your own nuclear family or whether you've got people scattered all over the country, and says, hey, send me all your photos that you've taken this year. And you back them up. You make sure there's copies of them everywhere. And you're the one who's going to make sure that photos don't get lost on phones because somebody's phone gets smashed or something like that. And this is a great and very satisfying thing to do. And the people that tend to be willing to take this on are the same kind of people who tend to belong to computer clubs like this. So I'm probably talking to the very people right now who are very likely to do this. So again, we want to make regular and fresh copies. It's a good idea. Every 2 or 3 years, take all your DVDs and make copies of them so that you've got brand new, fresh copies. And the family archivist tends to be a technology enthusiast and will watch for changes in file formats and storage medium. So, for example, I've suggested that you use DVDs. Well, maybe, if you're in a computer club and you're reading computer magazines and you're on computer websites, maybe you come to learn by all that reading that you do that DVDs are really on their way out. And in another 5 years, you won't be able to buy them anymore. You might see something that says manufacturers have all decided to stop making DVDs. So now you would think, okay, I need to copy those DVDs, all those photos off the DVDs and onto a hard drive or whatever the latest medium is that you think is going to survive for a long period of time. Whereas your Aunt Martha, you might be able to get her to back the photos up to DVDs, but she would never know that DVDs are not being used anymore if that ever comes to pass. So I would suggest that it's the very people that are listening right now that are the ones who might say, you know what, that's something I'd really like to do for my family, is become the archivist and collect everything that the family's got. And by the way, the archivist might also be the person who collects all the printed photos that date back 100 years and has them scanned and backed up onto DVDs or hard drives. So that can, if you want to take that job on, that can become your job as well. So, conclusion. The photos that we have that date back 100 years, for example, tend to look like this. They can be torn, they can be ragged, they can be faded, and frequently they're black and white. So your family doesn't have to end with you getting a digital camera. Most of us have photos of our grandparents that look just like this, but imagine 100 years from now, your great-grandchildren looking at a photo that's as vibrant as real life. What would you give to have photos of your great-grandparents that looked like this? And you can make that happen if you just take a little bit of care and use some of the techniques that we've talked about in here to make sure that your photos survive into the future and that they're still readable, they're still in good shape. And trust me, your grandkids, your great-grandkids will thank you. And that's all I've got.
Well, thank you, Mark. That was really terrific. You're an excellent speaker. I can tell you've been teaching for a long time. And we always learn something, and I learned a lot today. Thank you. We do have time for a few questions for Mark. So if we could maybe take the next 5 minutes for questions. Is that okay with you, Mark?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm hoping for them.
Good. Anybody have a question, please unmute yourself, and we'll try to go one at a time, please, for just a few minutes. Thank you.
I would like to start. I'm Jolyn Bowler. I'm with the Hilton Head Island Computer Club and have known Huey for many years. And two comments, really. First off, thank you. That was marvelous. And I'm going to talk to Huey about maybe we can use it for our club too. It was brilliant. My dad was a portrait artist, and we had a darkroom most of my life until he got a digital camera, and he then had a wonderful Canon photo printer that was his darkroom. He never developed another piece of film. He always used that, and he was able to he was able to print and change and edit and do contact sheets and all on the printer. So the digital age made a difference in the way he worked as a portrait artist. The second thing was, I had a member of the club come in a couple of weeks ago, and she had a package of CDs. Her husband had put these photos onto DVDs, but she had no way to read them. So I have copied them onto a thumb drive for her. But I will recommend that she also keep the DVDs.
Yes. Excellent.
Thank you again. Thank you again.
You're welcome. And that really brings back memories, because I did darkroom when I was in high school and college as well. I loved working in the darkroom, and I miss it a lot, but I don't do it anymore.
I had fun. I did too.
Yeah. It was great fun.
Another question from somebody, please?
Yeah. Hi, this is Dave. When you scan in photos, what resolution should you use? 300 or 600 dots per inch?
Oh, that's a good question. I'll tell you what I use. If I'm actually archiving photos, I'll use 600. And I've used some of those services where you can send off your photos and they'll scan them and send you back a DVD or a flash drive with it. And I've had really good luck with those guys. And I've used several different services. I wish I could think of the name of any of them off the top of my head, but I can't. But they do a really good job in my experience. And it's so nice to just be able to box up all your photos, send them off to them, and they do all the work, because I know scanning photos is tedious. So
also, Mark, if I may, companies will also do videos from your films and slides. There's companies out there that will convert anything to video or DVD to be saved. So you can find those. We have 3 more questions with hands raised. I'd like to go with them, starting with Dave Smolsky.
Yeah, that's me.
Dave, go ahead,
This is
Dave.
another part of the question is, do you recommend you use JPEG or PDF as a file format after you save the picture?
Oh, so if you're a real photography enthusiast, you'll save the raw images, but I don't suggest that for us mere mortals. Definitely JPEG. JPEG is going to be around forever. I'm really worried that over long periods of time, PDF is going to evolve. And I'm really worried that some things that are being put in PDFs today may not survive. So I would definitely use JPEG. And I'd use it over PNG or any GIF or any of the other file formats.
Okay, Sally. Sally Craig, you have a question. Unmute yourself, Sally.
I have a smartphone and I have purchased products called either Click Free or Digilogic, basically a thumb drive. Are you familiar with those, and how long do they last?
I'm not, but I think that's a great place to get them off the phone and then to be able to copy them somewhere else. But I would be worried that a flash drive, anything that's got flash memory in it, is not going to be around 50 years from now. It's not going to survive. So I would put them on a hard drive, put them on a DVD, something. I wouldn't just use, and you want to have as many copies in as many different places as you can. So if one of those is a flash drive, that's fine, but I wouldn't bet on the flash drive surviving long term.
Okay. And recently I bought a Windows 11 with a DVD drive in it on purpose. And
oh, really?
I was in Europe summer for 3 weeks. And fortunately, I had backed up all my photos. 2 days later, I got a virus in the phone and could get nothing off of it.
Oh, God.
But
Yeah.
I had everything on the Digilogic one. So I didn't lose anything.
Glad
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Sally. Steve Parker, you have your hand up, Steve?
Yeah. One thing I discovered in transferring photos to CDs and DVDs is that the crucial side of the disc is not what you would think. Most people think that it's the shiny surface. Actually, that doesn't really matter too much at all. As long as it can see through the plastic, it's fine. But the other side is where the coding is, and that's where the data actually is. If that gets scratched or anything else, you've lost everything on the disk.
Exactly true. However, I will say that's only true of CDs. DVDs actually have protective plastic on both sides. So that's why I'm a big proponent of DVDs. They're less susceptible to scratches on the back. But I've had the same experience you did, where the back of a CD got scratched and that was the end of it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Sharon Rump, you have your hand up. Do you have a question?
Yes. What is your opinion of programs like, I believe PhotoMime is one, that actually you can use your smartphone to scan or take a picture of a photo and then you'll have it digitized?
So if they, I think that's a fine way. That I'm okay with that. It's not going to do as good a job as one of the professional services scanning it, or as you could do with a flatbed scanner. So if it's really an important picture and you really want to make sure that it survives in all its glory into the future, I would either get it professionally scanned or get a flatbed scanner.
Yes, and the scanners, I think, may have options that you could have different resolutions possible when you're scanning something.
Yep. Yep.
Thank you.
Any other question? We've got time for maybe one more question. Anybody?